If destiny doesn't believe that there is a truth to learn, right, then the answer he gives is necessarily a political one.
I think an anti-realist is perfectly entitled to say, like, although I don't think moral claims are stance independently true, it is the case that, like, my stance-dependent view is that, you know, the Nazis are wrong and would be wrong even if they did in fact win. You don't think that someone that rejects that their stance-independent morality could still believe that the laws of logic have, like, stance-independent basis for them?
I think they would go back to what I was talking about earlier, which is the infinite regress of value, because then you'd have to say, well, what imparts value to the laws of logic, and then that's X. Well, what imparts value to X? And if you don't have a sufficient basis for that, then you're making a preferential claim again.
Liking and subscribing helps me continue to produce content, and it's greatly appreciated. You can also make sure to catch these debates live, either here on YouTube or in the description. There are links to my Twitch, my Kick, and my Twitter.
One great benefit of an objective moral philosophy is that you don't find yourself having to bite a bullet and I appreciate that you bit it, by the way. Most people wouldn't. Most people start getting a little nervous about that one. So I appreciate you biting the bullet. But one of the great benefits of an objective moral philosophy is you don't have to bite a bullet like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, you know, what would happen if the Nazis won? They'd still be wrong. They'd stistill be wrong because their actions violate natural law. You know, like they violate a human universal. So the I was talking to Reexamination about this before you joined. Like, epistemically, I subscribe to a common sense worldview where if I find myself in a position where I'm having to argue for something that I would never act out in my real life, then that's a good reason to doubt it. I would never take the position that, like, something that I know in my heart to be morally wrong is fine because the winners won. On moral subjectivism, there is no truth. There is only power. This is where the postmodernist ideas come from, right? Because if there's no truth to learn, the only question that matters is, can you get enough people in power to enforce your worldview? And if there is no truth but only power, when a postmodernist tells me that they believe something, I should not attempt to figure out whether it's true because they don't even care whether it's true. I should just, if I disagree, I should just try to ensure that they have no power. Because on their own view, there's nothing to learn. So why would I bother trying to figure out whether or not they're saying something true or meaningful when at bottom they have announced I am making a bid for power, and all I should do is then say, well, if I can trust you, then I'll trust you, but if not, I'm going to defeat you, and it has nothing to do with whether or not what you're saying is true because you don't even think it's true. Like, why would I take it more seriously than that?
Sure. I just have some issues with, even though I'm not an anti-realist, I just don't think an anti-realist is, like, committed to essentially anything that you're saying they are. I think what I take, like, moral realism to mean is a combination of the claim that, like, moral claims can be true or false. They are truth apt, that at least one of them is true or false, and 3, that they are stamped independently true or false. And I don't think a rejection of either or any one of those 3 claims necessarily commits you to any type of, like, sort of like cultural relativism, or where you have to admit, like, the dominant culture or whatever is the correct one. I think an anti-realist is perfectly entitled to say, like, although I don't think moral claims are stance independently true, it is the case that, like, my stance-dependent view is that, you know, the Nazis are wrong and would be wrong even if they did in fact win.
Okay, but on what basis? Because there's no truth.
But that's so much better than me.
Well, anti-realists are going to have different bases for that. Some of them are going to say morality is reducible to preferences. Other ones will, you know, base it on some other kind of broader stance-dependent framework still. But if what you mean by, like, what do you say, like, were the Nazis wrong? I think you have to specify whether you're talking about stance independently wrong or stance dependently wrong, because if you are just saying the anti-realist can't say the Nazis were stance independently wrong, that's, like, trivially true, because the definition of anti-realism would be that moral claims don't have a stance independent basis.
So that's part of the problem.
Yeah, but here's a little observation that I've noticed.
But that's not nearly as strong as an objection as you think it is, then, right? Because they're not committed to saying that under their view or anything, the Nazis would be correct in any way. All they're stating is that they don't believe that there's a stance-independent basis for morality.
And because there's no stance-independent basis, there's no reason why somebody who has a different stance should listen to.
No, well, they can have reasons. It's just not
justified reasons. That's why I said justified reasons.
Yeah. By justify, I don't know what you mean by justified. Do you mean stance independently justified?
If by stance independently you mean objective, then sure. Yeah. So okay, I can have reasons like the sky is
trivial at that point.
If I said the sky is blue, therefore
if I justified.
No,
if by justified you mean objectively justified.
If we're gonna understand the anti-realist on their worldview, you can understand it on an objective moral worldview too. When I say justified, I mean objectively true. So you can understand it both ways. That street can run both directions.
Sure. What I'm saying is, at that point, the claim is just absolutely trivial because all you're saying is the anti-realist doesn't have a stance-independent view of morality. Which is
you can still ask follow-up questions to clarify to make sure because you're talking to a human being. But go ahead, Ryan.
Nonfon, the thing I was trying to get at is how these philosophies impact the way we view our lives and the way we interact with each other. Right?
You did talk about that. That was not the only thing.
It wasn't the only thing. No, but the example I was giving with Destiny was when Destiny says there's no truth value about when it is moral and immoral to have an abortion. And then he says, I think it is wrong to ban abortion. Why on earth would I care what he thinks about it if there's no truth value to reach through reason? Because if there's no truth value to it, then it's just boiling down to preferences. I don't agree with Destiny on very many things. I don't hold him in high regard from his moral character or his fitness or his, he's not somebody who I take his word for things because of his reputation or something, some connection to me. So since there's no truth of the matter that he could convince me of, why would I care what he thinks about this? He couldn't give, he could never give me a reason.
Because I think you're coming from a very different framework for trying to prove what moral claims are true. So to some extent, you maybe won't find the arguments that he makes appealing because they're just a totally different framework. But insofar as you sort of agree on a framework for finding out the truth of moral claims, you can still have disagreements about the truth of moral claims, whether or not you come to different conclusions about whether they're stance dependently true or stance independently true. So a lot of philosophers work through some type of kind of reflexive equilibrium model where you're sort of weighing how valuable or how strong you think a fundamental moral intuition you have is versus the counter examples and how strong of counter examples they are, right? And then you have to decide whether that counter example is sufficient to maybe make you rethink the more foundational intuition, or whether you think that foundational intuition triumphs. And both moral anti-realist and moral realist can work through that reflexive equilibrium framework. And if Destiny works through that same framework, which I don't think he explicitly does, but I think implicitly a lot of philosophical arguments rely on that.
Can I reframe you a little bit? Because I think I just want to make sure, maybe I can ask the question more specifically. If Destiny doesn't believe that there is a truth to learn, right? Then the answer he gives is necessarily a political one. So because what else would it be? He does not believe
it would be a stance. It would be a stance dependently true claim. It'd be a claim that's true in his view that is not justified based on a stance independent view.
Okay, but
I think Destiny actually used this example in the abortion debate before where he said there's not a objective answer to whether Superman or Goku would win in a fight, but I don't think it means that you can't have an opinion on that, or you can't argue your position on that, or you can't make a sort of non-political argument. I think you can still make philosophical arguments.
Even can I jump in here for a second to clarify? If you don't believe that there's a true answer, then there's no reason to stick to reason. Right. You use reason because you believe there's a true answer. If you don't think there's a true answer, then reason doesn't hold. You can violate rationality if you want to, without it being, like, because why not? It's merely a question of preferences.
So I think I don't think being an anti-realist in a sense that you deny one of the three claims I set out earlier implies that you can, or like you're allowed to violate reason or whatever.
Why not?
It's just going to come down to because most people who are anti-realist still believe in the value of the laws of logic and such, and some people who are morally anti-realist probably to some extent are still I don't know what the term for it is, but probably still some of them probably still believe the laws of some logic stuff are objective, or maybe abstract objects also objectively exist. I'm sure there's a lot of people who hold both of those views, even if it's not the majority view.
They would say the laws of logic have value stance independent.
Some of them probably, I would imagine.
How?
Yeah, but they couldn't, could they?
I'm not.
You
don't think that someone that rejects that their stance independent morality could still believe that the laws of logic have like stance independent basis for them?
I think that would go back to what I was talking about earlier, which is the infinite regress of value, because then you'd have to say, well, what imparts value to the laws of logic, and then that's X. Well, what imparts value to X? And if you don't have a sufficient basis for that, then you're making a preferential claim again, or something, or you're making a claim that the laws of logic are God, or something along those lines.
There has to be a truth claim somewhere, right? So if you're not getting to that stasis, then what is the point? And otherwise, is it just entirely self-serving? And that would be my argument.
Whether there's an objective truth or not, let's pretend Ryan finds the objective truth, and he's got the objective truth to the universe, and there's 23 of him, and they're living inside this country, and he decides he's going to enforce those objective truths onto the rest of us. Does it fucking matter?
Yeah,
in my mind,
it would have to matter if it was objective.
If none of the rest of us,
none
of the rest of us care what he has to say, does it matter?
But objective is not actually.
That would make us wrong, and then because we'd be objectively wrong.
So here,
it would mean that you were
on
wrong.
That line.
So the question is, I guess, what matters more? Is it being correct or feeling good, essentially? And I think that's a fair question to ask.
Well,
right, because you can be wrong on Motrin or something. Go ahead. Sorry, Nonfon.
Right.
Like related to this and related to what you were saying like earlier about Odin coming down, right? I think you're making hypotheticals where there's some evidence provided that morality is in fact stance independent, and certainly anti-realists are not committed to saying that there is no evidence that could prove to them that morality is stance independent, right? Like moral anti-realist is perfectly able to say that, maybe I only have 60% credence in anti-realism, and I think maybe there's a 40% chance realism is true, and there could be evidence provided to me that would make me believe realism is true. And Odin coming down could be one of those things. It's not like a huge reductio or anything for the anti-realist position I don't think it applies that anti-realists like can choose to be God or whatever. Just because.
Yeah, but if truth doesn't have value,
committed to that at least.
The anti-realist is totally free. If I may just briefly, Hedgeman. The anti-realist is totally free to just say, sure, I could be convinced by evidence, but simply lie. Mm-hmm. Because you have no basis to say that they are deriving a truth claim or that they are going to be honest with you. That's what kind of started this.
But we're talking about things that provide evidence of the things that
quote.
They currently deny.
An atheist.
Yeah.
Well, again, but we're talking about things that provide evidence that would change your view on what is an oath or what is true, right? Like,
but that supposes that you ought to change your view if you're provided sufficient evidence, which is what we were talking about with Balderson before. Like, are you bound if you're given sufficient evidence? Are you bound to accept ideas once you're given sufficient evidence for that idea? And are you doing something wrong if you don't change your mind when you're given sufficient evidence for such idea?
I don't think you even have to go that far. Like, I'm a huge fan of Stefan Malmanou's universally preferable behavior. I think it's a wonderful framework, especially for atheists to understand why people do kind of tend on the broad strokes to collapse on the same kind of morality over and over and over again, and will continuously argue against one another, kind of on the basis of this moral line that seems to be drawn on every human's heart. But
Well, I
But
think
if somebody makes the proactive commitment to say, I don't believe any of this is real, Nonfon, earlier you appealed and said, hey, you can't just say off the bat that these people are going to be liars or have no basis for their justifications or no basis for their beliefs. You have to take on, what it is that they're saying, and you have to evaluate what you still have to grapple with it. And I agree, but part of grappling with that other person is the understanding they have an incentive to just lie. To just, no matter what, never have something that can be internally critiqued. They always have an incentive to take an oppositional view if it provides them power and if it lets them raise their preferences over yours.
Is that not true of everyone?
no, I don't think so. For one, I think converging either preferences or intuitions with regards to moral statements or whatever that's written in our hearts. I think that's evidence of moral claims being true in either framework. The fact that most people have an intuition of a thing can be evidence that a moral claim is stance dependently true or stance independently true, right? Using the same sort of reflexive equilibrium or intuitionist models that I was talking about earlier. Those are evidence for both views under that framework. But I don't think an anti-realist again is committed to is saying, you might have to repeat some of what you said, saying that they're always having an incentive to lie just because they always are going to want power and they're always going to favor their own pleasure or whatever. An anti-realist can still have, again, moral positions, moral claims. So I'd find that to be immoral. It's just that they would be stance dependently immoral.
So one of the things that I find curious about this is more of I guess of zooming out perspective, is that if anti-realism were true, whatever the fuck that statement means, but if you think about anti-realism or subjective morality or postmodernism, there's nothing in those beliefs that inherently would skew political perspective. So you would think you would find an equal distribution or a roughly equal distribution of postmodernists and subjectivists and anti-realists across the political spectrum, but they're almost universally on the left. Almost universally on the left. And one of the things that makes me suspicious of is political expedience. That, what you see something like someone says abortion, for example, they'll say, oh, well, we have an objective moral claim that abortion is wrong because of the following biblical passage or X, Y, and Z. And they're like, well, actually, morality is subjective, game over, let's do something different. So I guess, part of my suspicion is that when I'm talking to people who are taking a postmodernist, subjectivist, anti-realist, there's a kind of a constellation of beliefs there. I have a suspicion that even if I'm talking philosophy, I'm really talking politics. It feels that way to me. I don't know if other people have had that feeling, and I never seem to run into the base conservative anti-realist. They're always it's always the other way around. I don't know if you guys have had a different experience.
Yeah, because they talk about, it's about force, it's about society, it's about the powers that be at large. That's what it usually boils down to. We're not talking about a metaphysical law anymore. We're talking about what the theme is right now in terms of society, what society has decided. So that's why it sounds like politics every time.
Yeah. It's a flicker in the wind.
Well,
you gotta remember that.
And it's always anti-traditionalist, right? Because it creates an argument for any traditional rule being invalid because there's no truth value to it. So one of the arguments for a traditional rule is going to be, well, we should do it because it's true. And if there's no such thing, then of course we can infinitely modify those rules to our pleasure. Sorry, Spin, I cut you off.
Is there morality in politics or in a politician?
There should be.
Yeah, I think politics
I
is
asked the question again right now. Is there morality in a politician?
None of ours.
The answer is no. And the other comment is people cannot handle the truth, whether it's blatantly put in front of them or it is objectively proven.
Yeah, and I think that's where this gets complicated. And Balderson brought this up a few times earlier, where when you talk about things like that are abstract, the laws of logic, morality, love, like these things are not provable in the same way that the weight of Balderson's mug is provable, right? Like that they might be demonstrable through argument, but they're not provable through empiricism. So like, and I think that we have this we're at this moment in society where if you can't put it on a spreadsheet, people don't think it's true.
No
and
shit,
I think that I personally think that's a mistake, but I think that is that's what the trend has been of late.
Well, any
agree
conversation.
with Ryan. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Hey, Barbie.
No, you're okay, dude. Any conversation, whether I have political or any type of what I would consider logical conversation, whether it be about the sky is blue. Okay, you look up the fucking sky's blue. Any illogical person will say it's not blue. Would you agree? That's to anybody.
No, not always, and not in all circumstances. And the sky isn't always blue. That's sort of my sort of angle here. Is I mostly agree with Ryan, but there are degrees of freedom baked into this that are sort of inside of what you would consider natural law. Like these two things are true at different times in different spaces. Sometimes the sky is bright ass red, and that can be equally true, and it's not devaluating the truth of the fact that generally the sky is blue. One does not steal from the other. Those two things are honest in their nature, I suppose. I guess is how I would put it. So, I think there's a little bit more of a degree of freedom.
I would need a little more context where you're going.
Around. No,
I on that, Ryan, because I also was going to need more context.
Yeah.
What is he referring to?
So I didn't want to leave it stranded. Jefferson, thank you for the $2 and the question about Odinism, which I'm confident Balderson will answer if you give some context. But I think I left it stranded for long enough that I am not sure what you were talking about. Re-examination. It seems like you remember.
Yeah, there was something where along the lines of a scenario where he would defy Odin or disagree with Odin, and then would he be free to disagree with Odin or disobey Odin, or would it be like immoral because he had disagreement with Odin? Something along those lines. Do you remember?
Yeah, so and that's sort of what I was trying to.
Yeah, I remember that question. And certainly I'm free to disagree with Odin. Odin might punish me for that, but I'm certainly free to disagree.
Oh, wait, it was when the discussion was about how an Odist would think of someone who didn't believe that the Stein was 2 pounds.
Oh.
So I guess, does Odin command you to accept reasonable evidence?
No, I don't know that there's anything that commands that you accept objective facts. I don't know if there's like some specific command to that. It's a very salt of the earth. If you've ever read like the Havamal, it's a very salt of the earth farmers type of culture. So objective facts are everything they lived by. So I would have a hard time believing that that's not something that is at least understood. Mm-hmm. But again, we're talking, and this gets mushed together. This gets mixed and matched because every time you guys want to bring up fact that needs to be recognized, you make an objective example, and we're not talking objective. And the reason that I would care what you believe, even if I think you're crazy thinking that it's an actual true universal fact, is because we share a space together and we have to interact.
Yeah.
It-
So, can I piggyback off that and maybe open up a question to you guys, maybe you and Nonfon in particular, because I think you guys have taken this position. I'm kind of curious how you became convinced, to the extent that you are convinced, that morality is subjective or that morality is not real, whichever, pick your poison. Because at least in my experience, the human default is to the contrary. Like if you talk to like a 5-year-old kid, they talk about right or wrong in absolute terms. That's how they view the world, right? And like, obviously, it is possible for humans to be taught or learn or come to this view, but it does seem to me to not be the human default. So, I don't know, maybe you disagree with that, but like, how did you come to believe that morality is subjective or not real?
I agree that that is the default for most people, but I think most people don't put thought into anything. And the way that I came, I don't know about Nonfon, but I came to that by studying other cultures and realizing they also thought that they were right. And at the end of the day, there's not like some great teacher that ever comes down and goes, "Oh, your society's the right one. You guys, you're screwing up. Start doing it like these guys." No, in reality, so there's morals that you want your society to have, and then there's other societies you have to interact with, and hopefully you can do that without violence, and you can come to terms. If not, the violence is going to happen, and then the bigger guy is going to wipe out the smaller guy. That's just how it's going to pan out.
Nonfon, I want to hear your answer.
Yeah.
But do you mind if I give a quick response to that?
Sure.
But even there, I think like there's an impulse, right? Because like, when people started doing comparative religion, some people, when they learned about comparative religion, came to the conclusion, well, then it's all subjective and it's all like, let's start talking about how it's all different, right? Some people went the Joseph Campbell route and they started saying, well, let's figure out what's universally true. Let's talk about the hero's journey. Let's figure out like these core human, which would be kind of like the family tree of natural law, let's call it, right? So like, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think that strikes everyone the same way. Like, I think some people, when they started doing comparative studies, were like, holy shit, well, let's figure out what is core and what is true and what is transcendent and what isn't. I don't know. If what
I was letting Nonfon take his turn.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Nonfon.
I got it. Like, I would say my credence is pretty low either way when it comes to realism versus anti-realism. I think I would lean 55%-ish in favor of realism. It probably used to be a little higher. It's just through the readings I've done of, I haven't done much philosophy reading or anything, but I've read a little bit of Parfit. I read like Besant's Bulldog, the guy we talked to about Schumpeter. He's a moral realist. I've read some of his stuff in moral realism. And then on anti-realism, I've talked to like a Conaboy, and there's another dude named Charsky, and they've given some arguments for anti-realism that I think are sufficient to lower my credence in realism a bit. And I've read a little bit of Lance Bush, who's a like philosophy blogger as well, who's an anti-realist. But I want to say my credence is particularly high either way on that issue.
I guess, and maybe it could just be a difference in constitution. But for me, like if I'm going to put it in Bayesian terms, like I can have as many debates about free will as people as I want to have, but my Bayesian priors to humans have some degree of free will is so overwhelmingly high that while it is theoretically possible to be presented with evidence that would lead me to change my mind on that, the reality is it's an almost insurmountable barrier because my experience of free will is so strong. My experience of feeling like there is right and wrong, that there's a difference between these two things, is, I wouldn't say quite as strong as my experience of free will, but it's like up there. So like, as like a matter of Bayesian logic, right? Like it would be the evidence I would need to be presented to think there's no such thing as objective morality would have to be really, really strong. Like I don't feel like it's a neutral 50-50 starting point. And maybe that's not what you were saying, but that's kind of the vibe I got.
I don't think it should be a 50-50 starting point necessarily either. And I do think like it being intuitive is an argument in favor of more realism. I guess like it might just be a difference in how susceptible we feel certain intuitions are. Like I think it's quite plausible that like the intuition that more realism is true it comes from certain evolutionary pressures. It comes from, you know, the sort of desire we have for like certainty and such that is not necessarily most rational behavior. I know if you look at like we've done like brain scans of people and such while they're asked like particular like moral questions, like we know sort of the like regions of the brain used for like moral disgust are like the same as like physical disgust. Like if you tell people something that's like morally disgusting, it'll activate the same part of the brain as it does if you tell them like you used their toothbrush, like they're like you scrub the toilet with their toothbrush, right? So, you know, we know there's sort of like evolutionary shortcuts there that we have taken, and I think there's reasons to believe that our intuitions there are not so strong that like the evidence is it being intuitive is like overwhelming evidence in favor of more realism being true.
Ryan, do you feel like somebody that grew up in a different society that had different moral values than you would not also hold that same feeling like they're right? Like their morals are the ones?
I think they would have that feeling, but I think I have yet to meet someone who does not value on an intuitive level life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and property, or that does not prefer to be treated as an individual. Like I've never like in terms of when I talk about natural law, I'm talking about like big tentpole universal morals. I'm not talking about like fine lines of difference, right? So like in terms of like the intuition, those do seem to me, I mean, I'm sure there's like an exception that proves the rule, but like those do seem to me to be human universals. Like we value our life and our security, our freedom, our property. We want to be treated as an individual. Like I've never seen a culture or a counterexample, really. So
what about the Mormons, or not Mormons, Amish?
I think they value
they
all those
value
things.
Life, liberty. Yeah,
they
down
value
from
life,
Pennsylvania. I promise you, they do.
Well, I think at least when it comes to, you would also say people should value like those values in other people, right? They should value the freedom of others, the liberty of others. Clearly, like if you polled men in Afghanistan, they would not have the intuition that they ought value the liberty of woman in the same way that you probably think they do.
That's actually one of the the big sticky wicket. One of the biggest sticky wickets is like how the sexes are gonna relate to each other, because that's like, and I think that's one of the big cultural questions we have in the United States today. I don't know that there's a clear objective answer to that question about like how men and women ought to relate to each other. That certainly, if I'm using the just to be clear what I'm doing, I'm assuming a kind of a evolutionary standpoint rather than a divine standpoint while making this, because I think it's more appealing to like Balderson and you, rather than saying like there's a divine command. But you know, like I don't know that I could make an evolutionary argument for a human universal about relationships between the sexes, because there is I would agree there's too much variation between that. But like amongst men, I think that those would be universals.
But it's not just relationship to the sexes necessarily. I think that's one place today where you kind of see that most extreme. But like obviously, if you were to ask the Nazis, they would say that they would not value the liberty or the freedom or the property rights of Jewish people or disabled people and such. Like I think, you know, there are it's not so universal that the intuition can't be overridden, at least against other people, by like broader cultural norms.
Yeah, though
I think culture
of course it can be overridden, but the moral leap is that you have these intuitions, and then the leap is that it's universal, right? The intuitions are what I'm saying is universal. What you'd have to then demonstrate is that it's universal, right? So like the fact that you have the intuitions, I don't think necessarily means that everybody thinks it's universal, because it's trivially true that not everyone does think it's universal. The best evidence of that is even the Nazis is the fact that you don't think they're universal. So clearly not everyone thinks they're universal. Right. So I can't argue with that point. But I guess what I was getting at is, isn't there, you don't think that there's some Venn diagrams that even on like an evolutionary basis that are just kind of like core to human nature? They are just things that humans value.
Yeah, I think there are like broadly intuitions that most societies have now and have had historically. And I think those are, in some cases at least, pretty strong evidence of certain moral claims being true. I just don't, and to some degree, I think it's evidence of like, claims about life, liberty, and property being valuable, being true. I just think that with those specifically, I think there's probably decent reason to believe those intuitions are kind of overfitting more fundamental intuitions. And, there are other cases where I think people would have intuitions very much against natural law, that the majority of society would have them across history as well. So there's just more analysis that has to go into it, I think, other than just like what is an intuition that most people have or have had historically. But it is evidence.
I guess I don't understand how it's not evidence of progression of morals amongst a society, saying that the society in a whole experienced this and adjusted the moral sets to match. I don't understand how that isn't a thing, because there's not a single one of those morals that you can list that at one point in time we weren't running around just mad murdering each other. We weren't there. There's times where we lived without the property rights. In fact, there's people. What is it? What's his name? The German evil comic book guy that you'll owe nothing,
Marx.
You'll be happy. No, the current one.
Oh, Klaus Schwab.
Klaus Schwab. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, God, you couldn't ask for more of a comic book villain right there.
Somebody hand him a cat to pet. Yeah.
Yeah. It's every one of those things has been tested against the society, and the society said either yay or nay. And then you grew up in a certain culture that had already experienced this, and through that, your intuition somehow magically matches the things in your culture you grew up in, which is why I asked, do you not think that if you grew up in a different culture without those morals, like the famous Andrew Papua New Guinea thing, while the rest of us are like, holy smoke, I can't believe these people exist. Like, to them, this is great. This is how you do it. It's right. They probably think the rest of us are horrible.
Mine doesn't, though. Like I grew up in a culture that I regard as functionally the late Soviet Union. Is like, I think that's our modern culture. That's modern American culture, is the Soviet Union. So I'm very opposed to this sort of intrinsically, but also I find that people, when I'm discussing with them my issues with our modern Soviet style culture, they attack me on the basis of morality that they know I think exists. And this is, I think, key to what started this entire thread, is the fact that Destiny is a moral anti-realist doesn't prevent him from doing internal critiques on somebody else. Other people that I argue with, who refuse to at any point accept any kind of obligation, any kind of stricture, any kind of bind on their own behavior, who seem to take pleasure in saying no for fun and saying, no, I think I am going to collect more power and force you to do things my way instead. They're still perfectly able to constantly shift and try to attack my value system on the basis of my value system. They do still understand it. So the existence of evil people, I don't think really presses my idea of either universally preferable behavior or objective moral realism, because those evil people also seem to understand what they're doing. Maybe not in a way that's super conscious, but through their actions is demonstrated.
I think it can be
Sorry, just 1 second before you respond. Two things. One, we got a super chat from Jefferson C. Post. Welcome, buddy. Thank you for the 5. Could trying to find objective morals of the universe versus the morals as ordained by God, versus the morals that work, be searching for the same truth? That's a very interesting question, and I hope we can work it into our conversation. I'd particularly like to hear Reexamination's view on that, because this might be something that the deist natural law versus scriptural perspective might differ on. So this is a really interesting topic, and I hope we can dig into that. And Face reveal on Grassroots? What?
Yeah.
Hey, Grassroots.
No, I've shown my ugly mug all over the internet. It's fine.
Oh,
all right. I mean, that's big for me. Big for me. But sorry, Nonfon, I cut you off. And Jefferson,
Yeah, I have a question.
I'll leave
probably
this up so we can get into it.
Sure, related to the super chat as well. But I guess like, I would just ask, like, you guys would agree that moral realists and anti-realists both find, or at least most of them find, like reductios to be evidence against a certain ethical claim, right? Like if your theory leads to an insane conclusion, both under an anti-realist view and a realist view, that can be evidence against any specific claim that you make, right?
Insane by what standard?
Well, the difference there is going to be, well, do you mean like, I think what you're going to say standard it devolves into is just a like stance independent view already,
right? Because
like,
if you're going to judge somebody else's worldview,
a,
then you're assuming that the worldview you're judging another worldview by is superior or has the capabilities of judging it.
No. So I think, so if you were to make any number of ethical theories can get you to the claim that abortion is morally impermissible, right? There are a number of both realists and anti-realists who agree with that claim. There are a number of utilitarians who agree with that claim. There are a number of deontologists who agree with that claim. And, regardless of, most of those people, regardless of they're realist or anti-realist, will say that, like, if you give a reductio, to that claim, if you do like, the burning hospital reductio, their responses to that, I'm familiar. I'm not making that argument necessarily, but if you make the burning hospital argument, would you rather save 5 zygotes or 1 living toddler? That is evidence against the claim that abortion is morally impermissible, because their claim is based on a framework that lies to it. It leads to an insane conclusion, right? So that is evidence against the claim they're making, regardless of the stance independent or stance dependent view there.
No, I think the reason that the burning hospital scenario, or the burning hospital scenario, has to do more with what is a natural reflexive of what you can recognize as a baby in that case, not because you rationally deduce that something is going on and you calculate 5 people versus 1 person.
But that's a defeater. That's a defeater to the argument. I can agree with that to some extent. I think human intuition.
Reflexive feelings are a defeater to the argument of an objective value claim.
No, so the argument would be your argument for abortion being morally impermissible by saying like zygotes are persons, right? If that is a premise that the person defending or against abortion has, that claim leads to a conclusion that most people find unintuitive, that you ought save 5 zygotes over 1 toddler, right? And that is evidence against a view, and now you can provide defeaters to it. And I think you're somewhat accurate. I think part of the reason people want to save the toddler is because that's a thing they can see and they have a emotional reaction to it, and they've actually seen toddlers before. They haven't really seen zygotes before, right? So that's a defeater to the intuition that I even agree with to some extent. But that is still what you're doing there is the sort of type of stuff that both realists and anti-realists do when they try to prove these claims. And I think an anti-realist could be like, if Destiny brings up that point to Lila Rose, regardless of Destiny's opinion on anti-realism, they both accept that as evidence against a position that abortion is morally impermissible.
But I guess
Lila Rose says that it's evidence against the position that it is morally impermissible. I have not seen that.
Well, if she's a reasonable person, she would have to.
Reasonable by what standard?
I haven't seen her. By the standards of philosophy academics, okay. I think even
it depends on the grounding of a philosopher, but I don't.
But hold on,
I don't think the comparison between do 5 humans, should you save 5 humans versus 1 human, is the same as what would somebody do in a certain high stakes situation based on a reflexive.
But that's a defeater
feeling. It's not a defeater because they're not making a claim about the value of the person. Okay. If you're making a claim about the value of the person, and then you can find a way. No, you're making a claim about behavior. You're making a claim about behavior rather than what's objectively true.
The argument for the abortion advocate or pro-choice person or whatever is that this is a unintuitive conclusion, and then you are simply responding to that saying, I don't think the intuition here is that unexpected given the circumstances, and I don't take it as strong evidence. I think you should still take it as some evidence, right? I'm a consequentialist, but I think there are reductios against consequentialism that I take as evidence against consequentialism and lead me to reduce my credence in consequentialism, right? I think everyone should do that. Lila Rose, if she's a reasonable person, should do that as well. I believe to some extent she probably implicitly at least does that, although I haven't heard her use those exact Bayesian terms before or anything. But
yeah, but if
my
you
point is
said, should we take out
there
whole
are types of evidence that will affect or will be taken as valid evidence by both realists and anti-realists, regardless of them having different opinions on that.
But if you say taking out a whole city is wrong, and then you just say that in a vacuum, and then you give somebody, well, it's your son or the whole city, the life of your son, the whole city, it's like, well, that's a defeater for the idea that taking out a whole city is wrong then, because the intuition goes against that. Therefore, we can throw out the idea that taking out a whole city is wrong.
I think that there you're not necessarily defeating a. You're defeating an intuition to some extent, but really what you're making them do is you're saying like it's not sufficient for it to be wrong to take out a city. There are circumstances under which it is okay to take out a city.
Can we back out a second? Because and James, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you were saying is more something along these lines. Let's say I make an argument premised on my view of natural law, and I say that I think the following is morally true, and I make some claim about abortion, right? And then you give me a counter argument based off of rationality in my system, and now we have to contend with that. On the flip side, if I go to an emotivist and I'm like, I think you're wrong about abortion, and they just say like, that's my preference. You know what I mean?
That'd be a bad argument.
Yeah.
Well, but
why, and I think I understand what James was largely saying, right? What I'm saying is, despite what James said or whatever, we can say more broadly there are types of arguments, types of evidence that both realist and anti-realist will take as evidence against their positions or against certain ethical claims. So both a realist and anti-realist are typically going to accept a reductio as evidence against ethical claims, regardless of whether or not they believe that ethical claim can be stamped independently justified.
Well, but that requires
that's doing a lot of work. Regardless, in that phrase is doing a lot of work because the realist believes that they do have some kind of justification and has a pressure to remain consistent with that justification. The moral anti-realist does not. So the moral anti-realist is, as Ryan correctly pointed out, free to attack me on the basis of my justification and not allow me to will never argue for the sake of my preferences, but will retreat to it's just my preference and you're not allowed to argue against it when I try to turn the same critique back on them. So yes, that we might use the phrase uses like a reductio. We might both lead our arguments to that kind of conclusion, or we might both hold that shot in our locker, you could say, but for very different purposes and for very different reasons that ultimately I don't think I think lead us back to the same conclusion here, which is, can I trust a moral anti-realist in an argument? I think ultimately no.
I don't think you get to have all of both. I think most people kind of muddle around in a middle ground between the two. In reality, my preference is like there is a truth claim that is true and is real, but it's as real as you're able to go and find it, so it becomes more real with time. And it's like there's sort of a exponential curve that never quite hits 100% that you have to ride along. And for me, I'm okay with that personally. But I think we can't get there necessarily, but we can get really, really close. So
I see why my content might appeal to you then, because I think that's kind of like when you talk about like natural law, or as you're talking about like deism, it often has that vibe where you're like, I believe that there's a truth to aim at. I don't claim to be the arbiter of it or that I'm there. But so it's like a journey. I'm trying to figure out what the truth is, right? I think there's a nobility to that. Like if I believe that somebody's trying to figure out what the truth is, then we're kind of like, we're now premised in good faith when we interact with each other, when we have debates, when we have dialogues, right? The thing about let's call it like hard moral anti-realism, like a more extreme version, because Nonfon's pointed out correctly that there are variations, but like is that like if we don't agree that there's a truth to aim at, it becomes very difficult for me to think the conversation is worth having. Unless
the incentive stack is broken at that point.
That's a good way of putting it, right? Like,
do you think people that don't believe in objective moral systems don't want the best life, or they don't? And also,
no, I think they do, but you can want in one hand and shit in the other, I suppose.
Well, I will say the exact same for what you're saying.
Well, the question is, how do you qualify best?
Yeah,
the one that they
you mean stance independently best?
That's
the ones they feel is the best.
Society has decided that that's the best. Its people are the happiest. They live the best.
Is there such a thing as an unjust law? Because if laws are the reflection of the powers that be, and one person, is it possible for one person to be right to say that's an unjust law and all of society to be wrong?
Absolutely.
In your worldview.
Do you mean stance independently wrong? All these claims are either like that's trivial.
I'm talking. Okay, you can say it's trivial, but so
wait, you would agree? You would agree? Like, probably the most common type of anti-realism. I define moral realism earlier as relating to believing that there are moral claims or truth apt. That at least one of them is actually true or false, and thirdly, that they are stance independently true. I think the most common anti-realist rejects the third claim in that. There are some anti-realists who reject the first claim. I'm not familiar with many that reject the second one. So if, for the most common type of anti-realist who rejects the third claim, if all of these questions you're asking, I think all of them just reduce to, does the anti-realist believe in stance independent moral truths? You would agree it is trivially true that that anti-realists typically don't believe in
if I believe that an anti-realist was really consistent as a human being, yeah, but I'm asking individuals in terms of their worldview and how just exploring what they believe. Yeah, so just because somebody can say I take this worldview doesn't mean when they're pressed on different questions and different scenarios that might answer differently or discover that maybe they think differently, but they've not been pressed that question before. So I'm talking to individual people, not to an encyclopedia.
Sure, and I don't know how much Balderson is familiar with exactly the types of stuff I just laid out. And I think, if you can force someone into a contradictory position, like that is a good debate skill to have, and that is like evidence against their position to some extent. But I think any of the times you ask these questions of like, what does best mean or what is justified, all of them, I think, reduce to ultimately what is a trivial claim against at least the most common type of anti-realist, even if whoever the individual you're talking to doesn't realize it's a trivial claim. It is ultimately just trivially true that anti-realists don't believe in.
Then best would also be trivial, right?
Yeah.
If by best means independently best, then it is trivially true that moral anti-realists don't believe in.
So it's a superlative that's not a superlative.
Yeah, but and I think this is the point, right? Like if I was talking to a moral anti-realist, let's say that they I'm not saying it's the most common, but it's the simplest, so let's just use it. They deny the first point, that the first prong of Nonfon's 3 prongs. They just think moral claims are not subject to they're not truth apt. There's no true or false answer to moral claims. Why would I spend any time trying to convince them that something is true morally? Like they in their worldview, it doesn't exist. So what's the point of having that, like in a debate where I'm trying to like convince the audience? Sure. But let's say I was having a conversation one-on-one. If I believe something, like, let's say I have a moral truth that I believe, and I'm talking to a moral anti-realist who doesn't believe that there's such thing, trying to convince them that there is truth is irrelevant. The conversation must evolve, if I care about this issue and I'm trying to move the needle, to me trying to manipulate them or me trying to enforce my beliefs on them, because there's nothing true to aim at. Right. So my problem is it degrades the conversation. Like I can no longer speak to you about figuring out what is true and working on that together. I have to figure out how to manipulate you to my view or how to coerce you to my view, because there's no truth to talk about. And that feels like a big loss.
I think there are I think there are things that can be like stance dependently true, right? And depending on the type of anti-realist you're talking to, there are different arguments that you could give that would appeal to them to try to prove whether certain claims are under their stance-dependent view true or false. So, I mean, if you're talking to like some type of like ethical emotivist who kind of rejects the first claim, then they just thinks like moral statements are emotions essentially. There might still be like some arguments you can kind of give to be like to like affect their emotions on things to the extent that is manipulation. You want to say like maybe it could feel that way, but that is just going to be the type of evidence that appeals to them given their framework.
Shapingro has this is the perfect question. So let me just this is not going to be a perfect analogy, but I want to show you how this feels, right? If I adopt the position of hard solipsism for the rest of this conversation, right? And now you and I are going to have an abortion conversation.
Yeah.
Right? Try to convince me of any abortion topic, and I'll counter argue from the position of hard solipsism.
Right, but that's just going to be because the type of evidence that appeals to you under that framework is not going to be.
Well, since you're a figment of my imagination and not true, it is irrelevant to me what evidence you present.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like your framework is kind of rejecting the axioms that most people go off of, right? And I think to the extent that you have those like fundamentally conflicting axioms, the types of evidence that appeal to you are going to be different. So,
well, in fact, there's no evidence that you could use to appeal to me because I don't think you're real. I think you're a figment of my imagination.
But that's similarly situated.
I don't think it would be.
What matters?
I don't think you would be committed to the claim.
You would have to coerce me because I don't believe you're real.
Well, that's similarly situated to Ryan's rejection of the first. If Ryan rejects the first prong too of the scenario, right? If Ryan rejects the first prong and we end up in like a hard moral realist framework, it's essentially the same thing. Is that if you can't take that basic notion that the truth exists and we're gesturing towards it, then either you end up in some sort of like infinite reductive critique of whatever Ryan's position or whatever the opponent's position is, or it's an ever movable Mott and Bailey argument.
Yeah, and it kind of is, and the simple fact of the matter for me, and the way I approach things is that people feel first, and then every thought they have in their head is to retroactively justify that feeling. That's how people operate.
They backfill morality onto their feelings.
You can like that or not like it, but it simply just is the case. So, that does not tackle the issue of there being a truth claim that is real. There is a real truth, but people don't operate in an optimal way to find it. It's just not kind of how people work.
I want to ask, kind of relate to that.
I don't understand how the argument would be different if I'm presenting the moral system I have, which I think is subjective, and you're presenting yours that's the truth. How is this? How's the argument different? Are you gonna bring down for me a tablet that says, look, it's on the tablet, it was written by the universe? Or
no, I don't have to. No, I don't have to. I have to. No,
are you going to take and explain how your position is beneficial, the same as anybody else would?
Yeah, I would have to elicit a better result over time. Yeah, that would be.
So it's not because it's universal; it's because you have a justification that you work through real life experience.
Yes, yeah. It is coming from a felt experience. Yeah. So in that way, I'm more on your side, but I do think there's a universal impulse. There is something that is true.
But from like a solipsistic viewpoint,
we're all working toward it, but we're never quite getting there.
Well, I guess the question is, what about those who aren't working towards it? What about like either, I guess you could say anti-realists are doing it, or like in a large way, like communist or socialist societies try to tend towards a historical truth, which is based on lived experience in the Marxist sense, right? But like,
I don't even think it's historically true.
I mean, that's the Marxist. That's the Marxist argument, though.
Oh, it can be their argument. Their argument is dog shit. Fuck them.
That's what a way to win a debate.
Yeah, no, but this is this is why sometimes when you see Andrew Wilson debate, he'll get into a mode where he'll just saying like it's just my preference. It's just my preference, and he'll just start doing that, and that's it's a good expression of the feeling that one has when trying to have a moral discussion with an anti-realist.
And the reason that Andrew Wilson's successful is that he is an emotionally, intuitively driver. Like that is what runs his machine. Like that is how he operates.
I think it's because he debates people who aren't prepared on.
Doesn't agree.
But the whole thing is that if you're debating somebody,
Christianity, the rest of us don't share those morals. In fact, his sect of Christianity is the smallest. Even Christians don't share his views. So,
but that's an appeal to like majoritarians. The point is that if somebody's debating against says
how do you think society works?
Well, but religion and society are kind of separate the way they operate, right? But I'm just saying that like when Andrew Wilson goes with the like standpoint epistemology or the viewpoint morality, when he comes up against somebody who has that same, somebody's like, well, it's preference-based morality for me. He's like, well, fine, then it's preference-based morality for me. And so now we have these two lines that never intersect, and he's just putting a mirror up to the bullshit is the strategy there. Oh, if it's your preference, it's my preference. So let's just, jerk off and see what happens.
I understand it being kind of a waste of time. So
I mean, Andrew Wilson, I think, debates people who are not particularly prepared on the topic of like the Christian precept stuff, right? I think there's a reason, for the few like he has some debates with like Econoboy from a while ago, but economics he kind of got blown the fuck out on to the extent he debates like even just like Discord like Phil Bros who like actually know some philosophy. I think Andrew Wilson gets like blown the fuck out.
I don't know.
In those types of debates.
Said she was very, very good at philosophy during their last debate. So.
I don't think.
What's your deontology? What's your deontology?
Yeah, I don't think she counts as the type of Philbro I'm talking about. But I think that's why
we have to be nice to those type of things. Not so erudite because I'm also her moderator.
Yeah, no. Grassers, who aren't you?
And Nonfon too. Also,
who aren't you a moderator for? No, by the way, I teased, but she and I buried the hatchet, so there's no bad blood. But
it was a good watch, regardless.
I get what Andrew's saying. The problem is when you live in a society, we all feel that way. This is why they have these giant long discussions and debates on what rules to make.
Right.
And then we all come to a compromise. And we still each hold our own individual moral system. And it may not align exactly to the rules, but because we live in a society together, we need to go ahead and compromise and work these things out.
Sure. Right. Yeah. So that's the degrees of freedom that I was talking about. Is that there can be a truth claim, but there can be like 15 degrees in either direction that you can operate inside of that truth claim and still not be wrong, but you're closer to the truth, right? So what you want to do is try and get yourself into that 15 degrees of freedom.
So, but let's take it
on
this
either end.
This hypothetical like society and put it into like the federalist context, right? Is that you have the deal where federal law doesn't map on a state law a lot of times, and state laws are going completely against each other. Look at the Ninth Circuit, for example, and everything they're going through regarding gender affirming care or whatever, and versus say like the Fifth Circuit, right? And so the question is like when it's within that 15 degrees, right? Like that 15 degrees will be 180 depending on what state you live in, and then federal law trying to override stuff too.
Sure.
Like where's that consensus? So I mean, I'm just saying it becomes more of a meaty problem in the execution than in some like Platonic society idea, like where society is generally bending towards the same thing.
Yeah, but I think we have to get the first before we get to have the second. Right.
First?
But
the first being like we have to have a general understanding that there are degrees of freedom that we can operate around that
how do we get that
still have natural law at their core, and they do still operate, but they may not be. You're never going to get 100% of what you want, right?
Sure.
So that would be those degrees of freedom at work, and then I think after that, I think for that 15 degrees of latitude, you get hundreds of millions of people who are way more like apt to go like, oh, okay, all right, well, fine.
But like,
They'll buy onto your position a little bit better.
Yeah.
But how do we get that in California? Sorry, go ahead, Ron.
Quick shout out to the super chat. Living in Stuggs Walls temporarily with $2 popped in from Sitchin Adams to say I should write the book. All right, man. Well, I appreciate your support and
hey, fellow Sitchin Adams stan.
Yeah, the contributions along the way are very good incentive. So thank you so much. If I could just interject for 1 second, one thing I said earlier is that if we don't agree that there's a truth to pursue, it ends up being a conversation about politics, not morality, ultimately. And I think there was a, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Balderson, but the way you framed it out seems to be an agreement with me, where you're saying like, well, ultimately we live in a society, we have to vote, we have to live together. So like the moral question becomes a political question. And that seemed to be where you were going there. So I think that maybe that is just the case, that like if there's no truth to aim at, that the honest answer is that it is a political question at that point.
100%. And I think further, a factor that hasn't been discussed whatsoever is living conditions and nature. I think that changes your moral system completely. Everybody's high and mighty till their fucking kid is starving, right? That it's all of a sudden your moral system gets real shaky on what you're willing to do and not do. So the depending on what's going on in the world completely changes your moral system. It's a lived system of a society, and we make rules based off of our societal experience. And we disagree. Like I said, there's a voting process. Just the fact that there's a voting process says that this isn't some ordained thing. This is something we came to an agreement with the rest of society on. We said, hey, we as a people don't like it when you go around hurting other women folk. Don't like it when it happens to mine. You don't like it when it happens to yours. Let's not do it. We'll all like it better.
Sure.
And we did.
Yeah. So morality is politics.
But,
as a society,
the two cannot be unintertwined. I think would be that would be my
difference between societal morality and personal morality, though, because my morality again doesn't have to align with society. I probably have to abide by society's morality if I want to keep functioning in it, but that doesn't mean I don't have personal ideals.
Which goes back to my question from 20 minutes ago, which was, how do you determine an unjust law?
Oh my God.
No.
The same way I determine whether I like chocolate pudding or tapioca pudding.
I would say an unjust law, I guess, would be where your assertion of your proposed right would directly trample over someone else's. That would have to be kind of the basis. That might not be the end of it, but that would be the beginning of it.
But that assumes like a natural law type
standpoint. Yeah.
And I'm a natural law enthusiast. So that's where that comes from.
I think that if you're explicitly framing it in the context of like rights, I think that might assume some like deontological view, but I don't think it assumes really a natural law.
It is deontological.
And this is
at least for me.
But I think like so this is a question I have for Ryan, because I don't quite understand this, and despite watching a lot of his content, when you say things like we're kind of well, maybe not that much. Okay, don't be too funny.
All my wrench uncles are talking to each other. Oh, cute, adorable.
I watch you on Sitchin Adam, and sometimes when I know you're talking about some of this stuff, I watch it on 4x speed. Okay, but so when you say like Scottish common sense moral realism and you talk about like all this common sense morality stuff. Usually what I get from that, what that sounds like to me, is kind of we're using our common sense intuitions to arrive at a claim that is like irreducibly normative, right? It's irreducibly an ought claim. It doesn't reduce to facts about the world. But when you talk about natural law, what I usually get from natural law is something that is reducible to facts about the world, to natural facts, right? And I guess I don't know. I'm confused on where you stand on sort of how much immorality is simply reducible to like facts about how the world is, and how much immorality you think is like or irreducibly normative claims that are based on our intuition.
So the common sense view that I've adopted is essentially a question about axioms. Like it's an epistemic claim, really not an ontological claim. It's saying that like there are things about the world and humans and how we are that are not really worth doubting. Like that if you start like, yes, there are people who try, it's a foolish thing to do, and that we actually should accept that we are interacting with the world in the way we intuitively understand ourselves too. We have some modicum of free will. We live in a real world. We observe the real world through our through our sensory apparatus. There are other minds in this world. They're not philosophic zombies. Solipsism is false. We know right from wrong, right? Like it's kind of an epistemic grounding on these axioms, which is it's not dramatically dissimilar to how like most people ground axioms in the philosophy of science, for example. It goes a little further in some places, but it's essentially a similar endeavor. And then once you have that starting point, you derive natural law, right? So natural law is derived from that starting point. It's not axiomatically assumed.
Sure. So are we deriving it? First of all, what are we deriving? Are we deriving like normative claims, or are we deriving simply like, is claims, factual claims? And then are we deriving those based on primarily our intuitions, or based on just kind of facts about the natural world?
There's a lot of directions to do that. Are you asking how I do it, or like in general, how can it be done? Because those are probably slightly different, because I think there's multiple pathways. But like,
I guess probably mostly about how you do it. I guess
the way I do it is that from those starting points, the arguments for the existence of God are overwhelmingly strong. From God, I derive natural law. So that would be the pathway that I take. But there are other people who would take a pathway where they say like, from that starting point, and then let's presuppose evolution, and then let's look for human universals that are evolutionary imperatives, and that's what natural law is. And they're referring to natural law not as a divine thing, but as an evolutionary imperative. And there is a question in my mind about whether we're talking about the same thing at that point. We might not be. We might be. I'm not totally sure. But there's different avenues. But the avenue that I would take is going from there to God to natural law.
I guess that seems, maybe I'm mistaken, that seems basically reducible to just some type of divine commandment theory. Even if you think we have to derive the commands through our intuition or the natural world in which God made, so that we could arrive at those commands.
It's divine command theory absent command.
Right.
How's it not a command? Certainly we are commanded to follow.
The command's not
law.
given. It's deduced from the observations of the real world, is what Ryan's saying. God set up the real world, but all the imperatives or axioms are observation of the way the real world is set up, and then we base it upon that. And there's no command from God that we do it any certain kind of way.
Well, that was what I was trying to get at earlier when I was asking Ryan questions about like origins of evolution and things like that. Because unless you have an explicit statement from God that you are made in my image, I have this purpose for you, then we don't. If the God doesn't speak, we don't know what purpose God had for us, or if He had a purpose for us beyond our existence in general. And that's one of the things I wanted to get to. But of course, this is an open panel. So
yeah. No, I and this is actually something that I spend. I don't claim to have perfect answers here, because it's something like one of the great flaws of deism is that we have to like reconstruct the wheel philosophically, which makes life very challenging. So I struggled like just to give you like my own personal evolution, if you asked me last year if the omnis were true, I would have said no. If you asked me this year, I would say 80% likely they are true, because I spent a lot of time working on like, okay, if I start with the premise of my axioms, I've derived God exists, can I reasonably dispute the omnis? And I thought I could, and now I think I can't. And I was just a process that I was working through, right?
Yeah.
So like my answers to these are subject to change as I kind of work through this process. But yeah, the idea would be that if you believe that they're in God, you believe that humans are made in the image of God, you believe that there's moral worth ascribed to humans, then you can start deriving natural law from those premises, where it's like, well, we ought not be subject to tyranny. We ought be able to pursue our own ends. We ought not have our life taken from us for no cause. Like these are things that just seem like universal human maxims.
Most of which came from Hobbes.
But that's appealing to
the name of my dog.
Maximum that seems broadly like some type of like appeal to intuition to me. I don't think that relies on like a God existing. Like I don't understand. Like is the reason we have to follow
you asked
this
how
natural law
not the only way to do it.
Sure. Is the reason we have to follow natural law, in your view, because God has commanded us to follow natural law, or is it sufficient that natural law is just like an claim about how the world is?
If God issued no commands, you still ought follow natural law.
Okay, I don't understand how we're deriving that then, because at that point it was just
from our shared nature.
I was going to hit him on this because
why is that? But our shared nature it's just an is claim, right? Why ought I follow our nature? Like I don't even know our nature.
There you go. You figured out why I concluded this is where I ended up, and concluded that I must ascribe to the omnis because God's nature is good. That's the answer. And without the omnis, the whole thing breaks down.
Okay.
Well, I think Nonfon is kind of hinting at the Euthyphro dilemma a little bit, right? Nonfon. Yeah. So I'm
trying to essentially, I think if your claims about natural law are reducible to like non-normative claims to facts about the world, I think there's just like a kind of basic is-ought problem there that like. It seems like to the extent we can make is claims about what natural law is, at that point I'm kind of
so here's how I think
I follow it. What's the moral?
We solve the is-ought problem.
What's the normative?
Yeah, so I think we solve the is-ought problem because if truth is a consequence of who God is, if God himself is the basis of truth, then what his mind thinks is objectivity itself, is objectively true. And so therefore God's knowledge about why he made a thing is that thing, and what God believes of himself is necessarily good, just by necessity, the impossibility of the contrary. So that's how you would do that. But that's why we talked earlier about with Balderson. Do you believe that reality is this aquarium that God lives in and we live in, and we're all subject to the terms of the aquarium? And he basically said something along the lines of yes. Is that fair, Balderson? I think you said yes.
The all is the aquarium and everything. The God I follow is inside the aquarium.
Right. So God's inside the aquarium just as we're inside the aquarium. Right. In your worldview, yes. And then from my worldview, reality is God and what God has established and what God creates and sustains and ordains to happen, ordains to be. So that's
what I mean. Maybe divine commandment theory. Maybe it doesn't have the proper.
I don't subscribe to divine commandment theory.
Sure, right, but at this point, it seems your morality is reducible to God's design, if not commands, right? It's God's will, it's God's intention.
Because if he is the foundation of truth, it is necessarily true. For example, if I take a piece of paper and I write a letter X on it, and I say X represents the foundation of truth, and then I take an arrow that's starting from X and then circles back into X, yes, that is circular, but if X represents the foundation of truth, then the foundation of truth is necessarily self-justifying.
I would have to read a lot more. I'm not a Philip, bro.
Because if it's the foundation of truth, it's non-contingent. But if it's the foundation of truth, it's non-contingent, though.
You asked a Phil Bro question, so you got a Phil Bro answer.
But the thing too, though, right?
My point is there. It's not to like dispute necessarily that that argument works. Right? It could, for all I know. I'm not certain. I haven't watched enough. Ask Yourself debates for that one. Okay, but again, maybe divine command isn't the right term there, but it's not reducible to simply facts about the world. It's facts about the world plus the relation to God's will or God's beliefs and desires.
Yeah, but
to reevaluation, like
if you believe in the law of identity, you believe that identity exists.
Right.
So, sorry, go ahead, Loodle.
So it's the same point then, where you have your X on the paper and the circle that self-justifying because it is by its nature true, right? Any point in reality along that line you're drawing, right, will be readily observable through our sense perceptions is also true. Right. And so it's not just that because God made it, it's true, or God set it up, it's true. It's that any point along the line through our sense perceptions, observations, we can deduce true things. And that kind of also self-justifies in a way that's not relying upon any kind of divine command or structure. And if we deduce something that's like untrue, like we can go back to Copernicus and the heliocentric notion of the universe, right? And even in that case, the entirety of society thought that the sun was the center of the universe. You had one guy who turned out to be observing the fact and sense data and found out that there was this truth that even the majority of society, albeit ecclesiastically controlled, had rejected. So it's not merely that the X is the X. It's also that we can observe the consequences and the fallouts from this at any point in time along the spectrum of time, and also see things that are deductively true.
Wow.
What I don't
know
understand is your way of interpreting divine command is through experience. I'm not sure how you're differentiating that between preference and my experience has told me it's divine command. Outside of the one side has decided that it's divine command, and historically that's given them justification to do some pretty nasty things.
Well, it's divine command absent command.
Right.
I get the absent command, so I'm just wondering how you're differentiating between that and society preferred it through an experience.
So because it's absent command, the goal then is to figure out, like, what is it about humans and our unique moral dignity and how we relate to each other that is special and has moral worth. And once you figure that, and as you try to figure that out, what is it that obligates us to do for each other? Like what obligations does that put on me morally to recognize the shared spark of divinity amongst all of us on this panel? What does that? How does that influence my behavior? That's what I'm trying to figure out in a world where you presuppose a good God, and you are then trying to figure out, well, what does that mean if I don't have a command to work with, right? Because and that's the difference between deism and Christianity. I think Christians would agree with that premise. They just think that they received commands. So because they received commands, the whole thing is a little bit of a moot point from their perspective, because they don't need to do the work of these building blocks because they've been told reliably.
Yeah,
I don't see how you can't understand how other people can come to the same conclusions absent the God part.
Just to say that, like, even Christians don't struggle with the divine command issue because they believe that God is good. It's a frequent question to Christians in apologetics, like, hey, what are Christians? Are you just following God's law because he gave it to you? I think it's something that Nonfon is maybe gesturing towards, but ultimately Christians...
Is that a bad answer?
The answer going around this, or the end run for this, is just God is good. I am avoiding simply, like, life I consider good, for instance. And so you could say, but you could kill yourself in a discussion of health and fitness, physical fitness, how to improve my own health. Somebody could come in and say, hey, you could kill yourself. And they would be correct. I do have the option of killing myself. And as a means of saying, well, just because it is the case that you can improve your health doesn't mean that you have to improve your health. And that's true. You can have the ultimate out of, you could kill yourself. But it's not really relevant to everybody else who's discussing the oughts and the axioms that they've already sort of accepted by having the conversation. So the conversation of, even for deists or for Christians, following along in God's footsteps, if you will, or following God's law, following God's commands, however you want to frame them, is how do I avoid moral suicide, or what lies outside moral suicide? But it's not an issue for us. I am happy to say that, like, not engaging in suicide is a preference. but I do think it's also an ought that I've accepted just by participating in the discussion of health.
Yeah. So I don't know if those were satisfactory answers, Balderson, to your question, but let me know.
I didn't get a satisfactory answer. Well, I mean, where you said it isn't. So I'm just wondering how, when we can derive the same answer because we're both using the societal experiences as a measure, then, and one person says it was divine from God, and the other person, or, you know, the creator or whatever, and the other person says, no, that's just what we've just discovered and preferred as a society through experience. I'm not sure how one is superior to the other.
I've never met a theist who claimed that you needed to be a theist to be moral. The answer, for believers, is that God is true, and that's true regardless of whether you believed in him or not. So it's unsurprising that you can be moral. It's just that you are able to be moral because what I believe is true. You might disagree with it, but it is true regardless. So the fact that you see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. So I like to use the example.
What I'm not understanding is we're both using the same judgment measure. So the only difference is you're saying it comes down as divine from your God, and I'm saying it's through societal experience that we as a society used our free will collectively to decide that this is how it should be. And we're both using societal experience. You're just calling it divine.
Well, look at it like you got somebody who believes in the round earth and somebody believes in a flat earth, right? And the flat earther denies the existence of gravity, but they live in that every day, right? And they just call it something else, and they say it's not gravity. But the round earther is like, well, it is gravity, so
it's is the same. It's what's causing it. The effect is the same, and what's causing it is different. So it's telling me, you know, you're telling me I have to believe that the mass of the Earth causes such a warp in the time-space continuum that it creates this magical force called gravity that we can't scientifically repeat. That's a whole lot different.
Are you a flat earther, Balderson?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay.
But I don't really know.
Why not?
It's not something I get into.
Sorry,
I find some of their arguments very interesting, and I find some of the normal science arguments very lacking.
Okay, well, let's just presume for the sake of argument that within a round world, there are flat earthers that experience the same thing that some call gravity and some don't. But in this scenario, we got a round earth where gravity is real, and therefore there's overlap in experience, but difference in opinion.
Like if the societal actions that are
in opinion and what caused it. But we're both going to operate in our daily lives like that force that creates a downward trajectory exists.
Yeah, and we both live in a world where I would say we have a conscience which directs us to, I believe, objective morality, roughly. Obviously, I don't believe the conscience is perfect or omniscient. It can be damaged, but we have a conscience.
But you can't say then that it came through experience. The experience can't be your judgment for it because we all have learned from experience, like, hey, I touched fire, it burnt, I didn't like it, don't do it again. That didn't require divine, that just required experience. And as a society,
that presupposes
that is the same.
But does that presuppose that bodily harm is bad?
I think he's just saying that the pain sensation of the individual will tell him not to do that action again. I think it's what he's saying.
Right. So he's attributing bad to that bodily sensation.
To the pain. Yeah.
Well,
but the same thing is that
you guys would just say, like, you know, the reason we have these intuitions and these experiences or whatever is because they're divinely inspired, and that's why they can be used reliably to determine like God's will or God's moral laws and such, right?
I want to be careful with conscience because I think the conscience can be damaged. But I think in general, it's safe to say that we as humans have a conscience. That's basically what I'm comfortable saying, for sure.
Well, I think we have both a conscience and in a very Youngian way, a cultural zeitgeist that One has our individual preferences and the other has the preferences as a society. They both have come through experience. Your experience might not match the general experience of society, so you have slight variations, but you also have to fit into that society. But all of this is coming from experience and through lived experience. It's not divine.
So if we're saying like a Jungian notion of consciousness, or even like a collective unconsciousness, are we saying like a society?
Yeah.
Well, are we saying that it's particular to a society itself and the traditions and culture of that society, or is there a larger, broader human experience in the Jungian notion that is informing the way societies develop underneath it all?
I would say that there is definitely both. That both exist. That there's a more regional conscious, and we've all lived in areas where you're in that area by the way those people are. You're like, oh, these people around here are like this. But then there's also a more United States people are like this. And so we have, and it just starts getting more watered down as you add in more people, because you start having a lot more variance in how in their lived experience culturally.
It's a lot tighter when you remove them too.
Alderson, can I maybe I give you an example? I'm not sure this is going to help. I'm trying to figure out how to answer this question in a way that'll be useful, and maybe this anecdote will help. I don't know if you watched the discussion I had with the Econo Boy about socialism, which is on my channel. But at one of the more interesting exchanges is he asked me if I could guarantee you that everyone would be happier and richer if we abolished the right to own property. Would you think that is a good thing to do? And I said no. It would not be a good thing to do. And that's maybe a useful distinction between a worldview that's premised on like trying to determine natural rights or trying to determine what our nature is versus, like, for example, a utilitarian view that he was presupposing, which is in that instance socially determined. Like when I think about natural rights and these essential liberties, they're not open for debate, right? They're not like they cannot be abolished in the way that he proposed abolishing, because I view them differently. So while we all have shared experiences, and of course our shared experiences influence our worldview, the chasis of me trying to figure out like what are these moral laws and what are these moral goals versus I think the chasis you described, which is purely subjective and intersubjective and political, do lead to different conclusions, because you need some basis to evaluate whether something is good or bad, right?
Well, hold on.
So if you adopt a different basis, you're going to weight these things very differently.
The society you grew up in
on that point, I just
particular morals. So you've been programmed to do that. Had you grown up in another country in a different culture, you would have been programmed to that. You're just telling me you followed your programming.
Well, again, I think I think natural law is essentially a human universal. So I would disagree with you there.
Yeah, first of all, just a Econo Boy's an egalitarian. Okay, don't lump him in with us. Okay, not a utilitarian. All right. But secondly, I think so. Again, if I'm understanding correctly, you are like saying to some extent determining what natural law like is going to be determined by our intuitions, our common sense morality, our experiences as to some extent influenced or divinely inspired or whatever. I guess, but you know,
and our reason. I think some of it you can do a priori, but not all of it. Yeah,
sure. But like it seems like at that point, like two things, I guess. One, I think kind of the same process at which you're getting to that would also lead to the conclusions that Econo Boy is getting to, right? Like, I think most people would have some common sense intuition, right? That like it would be better to get rid of property rights if it made everyone 10 times richer and happier. I think most people would answer yes to that question. And, you know, we have like kind of conflicting intuitions here. I don't know how under your framework, you're like deciding which one to weigh more. Like we have a clear counterexample. I don't know how we're weighing one more here.
It is prima facie immoral to take someone's property rights. I think most people generally prima facie immoral to take someone's money. It can also not be. So that would be, I think, where Ryan and I probably come from a similar spot. It is always immoral to take someone's property rights. That just is the case.
But it seems like we have the like defeaters of that or counter examples of that, right? So like obviously like if I'm depending on what property rights framework you want to use, but like if I'm homesteading somewhere and I come across like an orange farm and oranges are already growing, but like I build a fence around it, and now by nature of Lockean proviso or whatever framework we want to use, I now like own this orange farm, right, where these oranges were already growing anyways, but I improved it a bit, so now I own all of it. If someone was like literally starving, if someone was like literally starving,
the one
like,
that I made,
sure, like going to die if you like did not give them the orange or whatever, if they did not steal an orange. And most people do not have the intuition that it is immoral for the starving person to steal the orange, even though depending on your framework or property rights, that would be in violation of the property rights, right? So I guess I don't know. It seems like by the same framework,
there's a huge shift you just did from the example I gave.
Yeah, one.
A common voice said abolish property rights, not infringe upon.
It is to remove them entirely.
I think, you could. I don't know how much you want to scale up the example. I mean, humans get progressively worse.
It's a universal example.
This is a critical difference. If I believe that these rights could never, to any quantum, be infringed, I'd be an ANCAP, right? That's how you end up like Fabian Liberty. That's his view. That these rights are so absolute they can never be infringed. What our founders...
But how are you getting at that? Seemingly, you're getting at that because you're weighing the intuition that property rights and liberty and these things are valuable against the intuition that there are sufficiently good enough cases where it is morally acceptable to violate these. It seems...
Abolish is a universal claim.
The argument is that there is no case. There is no case.
But
you cannot remove someone's property right.
You agree you can infringe. You can infringe on some rights in some circumstances.
If it's an absolute claim,
but if it's to get to that conclusion.
But if it's an absolute claim that if we can promise you a utopian outcome, 100% good outcome, just hocus pocusing out of the air, then is it okay to abolish? Meaning an absolute claim that there are no, like we're abolishing property rights is very different than a specific example under United States notions of improving land and getting property rights under that kind of property law standpoint. Is it okay in this particular case to violate them? That's a different scenario entirely.
So there's 2 points I want to make here. The primary one is I'm questioning, I'm critiquing kind of, or looking at how your framework for how you arrive at these conclusions. Because if we say we have these common sense morality and intuitions and such that get us to the conclusion that these like property rights exist and this is a part of natural law, we ought not violate it, right? But there are or we ought not abolish it. But there are cases where you can infringe on it to some extent because there are sufficiently good outcomes or whatever. I'm asking, like, it seems like the conclusion or the way we're getting to that, I would imagine, is we're doing some type of calculus between our intuition that property rights are valuable and our insight into this versus our intuition that the outcomes are also valuable, and we ought like infringe on it in some cases if sufficiently good outcomes.
Nonfon, do you accept that you're endangering your rights every time you do that? Do you accept that is the case?
I don't see how that's. What do you mean? Do I accept that, like, when I talk about this stuff,
every time you make a concession and go like, hey, well, I'll give up a little bit of this. When it comes to property rights, and I will say I'm a libertarian, and so when I talk about property rights, one of my property rights that I consider is my own life, like my own body. So like,
I mean, I think there are counterexamples of that, even with
in that area. I start to get very allergic to things very quickly.
My question.
There's a good paper by Amos Wallen going over some of the stuff with that, and I think there's other work about the like self-ownership principle and stuff that I think there are counterexamples to that. But regardless, the point is, like, I could accept generally, and like from a consequentialist framework, even I'm not even necessarily like. This line of argumentation does not require me at all to have a consequentialist view. I could have any number of views and defend the same line of argumentation. But even from a consequentialist framework, I could say I recognize that, like, any time the government is kind of infringing on these rights or whatever, that like sets precedent in the future that can happen more easily now, that can lead to bad outcomes. So I can be against that even as a consequentialist. But my line of argument right now is simply that I think you're arriving at the conclusion that it's okay to infringe on property rights by sort of weighing, or at least in some cases, by sort of weighing our intuitions here or some other like philosophical framework that I think would kind of equally imply that there are, we should be at least taking into consideration the same types of arguments, the same type of reductios, the same type of counterexamples when considering whether or not like natural law is the super divinely inspired thing and that we can never fully abolish property rights or whatever.
I don't think they're not being taken into consideration. They're just being weighed as lesser.
It seems like you're weighing them zero.
I'm not.
It's a value maximization problem. It's a value maximization problem. The easiest way of looking at like if you do like a liberty security analysis, when you increase liberty, you often lose security, and vice versa. When you increase security, you lose liberty. If I believed, as Scott Fabian does, that you could maximize them all simultaneously with no infringement, then you go down the anarcho-objectivist route. I don't. I do think it's a value maximization problem, but abolishing an entire category of rights is never going to be justified on a value maximization frame. So
I don't see. So there's two things. One, I think it would just lead to the absurd conclusion that like you could abolish 99% of property rights for a sufficiently large amount of happiness, but there is no sufficiently large amount of happiness or any other thing that you value that would ever justify getting rid of the remaining 1% of property rights. I think that's an absurd conclusion. I think that should be taken into evidence against your position.
I think there's
my line of argument here is physically.
Also, are you like speed talking? Like what's happening right now? Is this your normal talking voice?
Because I want to get through. Because I want to get through the. These are two semi-related.
I've listened to enough Nonfon. I think this is normal talking.
You don't need to like.
Sure. I'm just saying. I think I want to get through. I mentioned this earlier. I said I wanted to say a second thing, but I never got to mention that is the second thing. I think this view would lead to an absurd conclusion. I think that should be taken as evidence against the position. But the more kind of meta thing that I'm kind of trying to question here is I don't understand how we're arriving at the conclusion that we can never abolish a full set of rights. I don't understand a framework for arriving at that would equally get you to accepting that we should, in some cases infringe on property rights if the outcomes are sufficiently good enough.
Nonfon, I think it's obvious. Like let's make it a different right. Let's say I said I could guarantee a utopian future where the net happiness is much, much higher, but the state has the absolute right to kill whoever they want for any reason with no explanation. Would you be in favor of that?
I think most people might have the intuition against that, but I like
for the exact same reason that I have the intuition against the property rights, because you're abolishing the natural right to life.
Sure, but what I'm questioning here is not whether I'm not like I'll tell you based on to be clear, my normative judgment there would be that would be acceptable. I think most people would have an intuition against that. I think they're wrong in that intuition. I think there are reasons to believe they're sort of overfitting their intuitions there. But I'm not like regardless of what you think the normative view is imply or whatever. I'm just simply stating if we're using these types of common sense morality rules or whatever, these intuitions, and we're kind of weighing, the things we care about. Or I don't understand how we get to the conclusion that some of these things would be acceptable to infringe without also arriving at the conclusion, or without, also arriving at the conclusion that it would be acceptable under some circumstances to abolish these things.
Well, I think that what Ryan is arguing in Grassroots too is kind of like an idea of like Pareto maximization, is that there is a point where these things can exist in tension. I don't think it has to be the all or nothing, that either it's not okay to abolish them, or, and again, you're positing a utopian outcome.
Okay.
Well, you're like positing a utopian outcome if it's abolished. The thing is that there's no like factual argument that that's even a possibility. So like, if everybody could be raptured today and go right to heaven or whatever, then there are no rights anyways. Like, but it's a fantastical outcome. And the idea that the same thing that like infringing upon is equal to abolishing, that's not a part of natural law or
I'm not claiming infringing upon is equal to abolishing. What I'm saying is,
before we get heated, Shapingro, I want to answer your question. I have no idea what the Fon's utility optimization problem is. So I appreciate the dono. Thank you for the 5. Really appreciate it.
No, I think he's referring to.
because I don't know what you're talking about.
I think it's just referring to your issues you take with like measuring utility and like weighing utility, by people or whatever, like the interpersonal comparisons and stuff.
Well,
I think that's what he's referring to.
The largest problem there is that there's no metric. Like one of the things that natural law solves is at least you have a metric. You know at least roughly what the categories are, and because there are categories, then we can engage in some level of value maximization. In utilitarianism, there's no denominator and there's no unit. So ultimately, when you end up having to figure out, like, is this, do we have more units of whatever it is? The entire question turns on the whatever it is. Is it human flourishing? Is it happiness? Is it pleasure? Is it harm reduction? These are all completely different.
Well, I think there are a few responses to that I can get to. I mean, generally, I think the answer is going to be that there are obviously intuitive cases where you can make these type of comparisons, and we do it quite regularly, even in our day-to-day lives when weighing what options to do. And secondly, that there are you're going to face kind of similar problems to some extent, maybe to a lesser degree. I think anyone who considers utility at all is going to face somewhat of a similar problem. I think even whether or not something is a violation of someone's rights, and how severe the rights violation is, will depend on the utility calculation, right? Like, it's probably worse. It's probably a bigger violation of your rights for the government to take your home without any payment and do nothing with it than it is for the government to provide you more than market value for your home. But suppose hypothetical, you're still not willing to sell it at that price, so they are forcing it, and then like build a highway with it that it helps a lot of people, right? I think that kind of shows that
kind of calculus, and this came up with the other example, is built into the way that our founders, who were believers in natural law, built the country. Right? Like, can the government... You're going to have the same kind of issue there. You can't speed talk and interrupt. You got to pick one. If you're like, can the government take your life? Yes, with adequate due process. Can the government take your property? Yes, as long as you're given just compensation in the eminent domain process. Like, the way that our country was built was an exercise in trying to do this value maximization problem. And I'm not sure that there's one answer to these questions. I don't have like the only answer, but I do think that agreeing on the framework allows you to engage in like the process of trying to figure out what the answer should be. When people disagree that the framework exists, that's a challenge I'm more concerned about, because then how are we struggle to speak the same moral language. Right. And by the way, from a value maximization standpoint, if people don't have a common morality, you can't maximize liberty. Right. Maximizing liberty requires people have a shared morality, and they police themselves to some extent.
So let me just ask Nonfon. I was just curious about what you just laid out, Nonfon. I just had a question. Is like, from the example you were saying that we can intuit these things from like our daily experiences. Are you saying that there's daily experiences that we can intuit? Well, I didn't finish it. Please, just 1 second. Are there things we can intuit from the way we operate in our daily experiences, like you were saying, that would then argue for the abolishment or the abolition of a category of natural rights or of individual rights?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think when I say that, what I mean is there are obviously cases where we intuitively understand the sort of like utility comparisons and even interpersonal utility comparisons that people say it's just like impossible to do or whatever. I think obviously if there's two people trapped under a building that collapsed because of an earthquake, and the only way to save person A is to grab person B's foot and use it to, break through a piece of rubble so you can reach person A, clearly I think we can say you ought use person B's foot even without their consent and, break it or harm it to some degree to save person A, because, the loss to person B in that case is just not worth the gain to person A by saving their lives. There are similar things. Like, I think if you obviously like donating to a charity that prevents thousands of people from being blind probably just has more utility, right? More welfare, more happiness increase than donating to a charity that trains seeing eye dogs, even if you think that we should prioritize one over the other for whatever reason. I think the utility consideration is pretty clear there. And my point to Ryan there was simply that insofar as you A, value utility, and B, determine what certain rights violations or the degree to which things are rights violation based on utility, I think you're going to face a lesser degree, but a similar problem in that you're still going to have to make these types of, utility comparisons and utility considerations. But again, my overall point is just kind of disputing the more kind of meta like framework we're even getting at, because I think by the same common sense intuitions that you would arrive at the claim that we have these rights, people would also arrive at the claim that there are cases where the outcomes or whatever else they value would be sufficiently good enough to justify abolishing those rights.
Abolishing or like limiting in a certain circumstance?
Yeah,
You're like
it's
circumstantial
abolishing.
arguments. Both? Okay, well then give us. Go ahead.
What? So I think people would say both. There would obviously be cases. I gave the orange example earlier where people would agree that you ought violate that,
abolishing any right,
infringe on
though.
that right. I'm
not
saying
abolishing the right,
you asked abolish or infringe. I'm telling you both.
No,
So
I
in
said
that
abolish.
example,
I said abolish.
I think maybe
here.
maybe one way to shortcut this a little bit, just because I think it's true and it's a little bit unfair because in hypos you have to accept the hypo, don't fight the hypo, that sort of thing. I think another thing, just to flag it up front because it does color the way I think about this. I actually don't believe the hypo's coherent is the other problem. Like because the view I'm committed to, Grassroots gave 5, said he couldn't come back, and then came back anyway. What a fucking legend. Grassroots, thanks, buddy. But Nonfon, because I'm committed to the view that humans have a nature, and that nature is pegged to like an unchanging, aspect, that there's aspects of human nature that just are. I actually don't think it's possible to have a good outcome when violating these rights in the medium to long term. So like abolishing the rights and everyone's happy, like for the sake of a hypo, I have to play along. But in reality, I don't actually think that's possible. I think it would always go badly. Like if you ask me, like if you gave the power of the state to have absolute right to kill anyone for any reason at any time, but it's going to be a good outcome, we can talk about whether or not what we think about the hypo, but ultimately I think that that's just bullshit. Like I think that giving a state that level of tyrannical power will always end badly. So on a practical level, I just don't think the hypo is coherent. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's also part of the issue.
Kind of, because at that point, it doesn't sound like your morality, you're not deriving natural law from the same type of intuitions that people care about when they talk about other things in philosophy. You're deriving it from the sort of fundamental nature that you think we have that is like divinely inspired. And by that, under that framework, I think you can.
I said that at the outset. Like you can't be
but
surprised
I don't think
by that. That was like the first thing.
That's not
the
like
first thing
that's
you
not
asked
like.
was the first thing I said.
But that I think that's a bit different than like common sense morality or like the other kind of base intuitions that we have that we appeal to.
I got to direct you back to the first part of the conversation. I said I use common sense to derive fundamental axioms. From the axioms, I derive God. From God, I derive natural law. But
then how are we? So what is the analysis we're doing when we say it is okay to sort of infringe on property rights in this case? What natural law, what outcomes in such are we weighing there such that that is acceptable, but it is unacceptable to, in any case, like violate or entirely abolish a right as opposed to violating it. It's just based on.
If I may,
based on what? Based on your analysis of man's intrinsic nature?
Let James go.
With regards to the hypothetical you gave earlier, it's not acceptable. It's specifically a moral crisis that you've engineered, where I have to either commit suicide by not stealing from this other person, or I have to. Sorry, somebody speaking?
Grassroots was talking. It's okay. Go ahead, James.
Oh, sorry.
Apologies for that.
Either I have to kill myself by not taking the orange, or I have to infringe on this other person's right. It's still wrong to infringe on that other person's right. I think it's also wrong to kill myself. I'm at a point of crisis with this other person. But here's the thing. The utilitarian might say, okay, you've done nothing wrong by taking the orange. But somebody like myself or somebody like Ryan can easily say, okay, you've done something wrong. I'm not going to stop you from taking the orange, but I am going to tell you, hey, you have to pay the orange back. Sorry.
Lay down.
Grass, can you mute yourself when you're talking to your dog, buddy?
Sorry
Yeah,
about that.
good work. Good work.
Sorry, meant to. Yeah, my bad.
Well, but here's like my deeper flaw with that. Then it seems like there's never. I don't understand what type of intuition could ever sort of defeat these views. Like it doesn't seem like any intuition that even the majority of society is against, or like almost everyone would disagree with even some intuitions or even some arguments I know like Ryan has based on natural law that like just animal suffering like just doesn't matter at all, like that it's just zero, nada, nothing, negligible in the context of no human also being harmed by it. Like there's like no counterexample I can provide that would ever be like sufficient to make you kind of question your view on this, because it's all rooted in a like much kind of like deeper thing that's not really the common sense intuitions that I think at least people think it is when you say like common sense intuition.
But that has nothing to do with what James said, though. But James didn't say anything like that.
James had it, but I don't think James was understanding my point properly.
You keep transposing common sense into the wrong part of the argument. The common sense in common sense moral realism is limited to determining epistemic fundamental axioms from which I derived an ontological truth: God exists, right?
I mean, I've heard you, sure, but I've also heard you give the example of like, I had to describe to my 3-year-old why like lying is wrong, and I needed a framework. I needed a simple common sense like framework in order to be able to do that. That doesn't strike me as like your 3-year-old's not like understanding the axioms that get you to accepting that God exists and the ontological stuff that follows from it. What I take from that is, a more what kind of
I would argue they do.
How is that this possible?
Yeah, me too.
I would argue they
I don't
do.
understand how that interacts meaningfully with what I
I
just
think a
said.
3-year-old knows exactly what being dishonest is. I think they know it when they do it. And every 3-year-old will lie to you, including
you can tell me
including
I'm
my godson.
Misunderstanding what I say this.
And Grass, to build on that, what he's referencing is that one of my starting points in examining this philosophy is when I realized I was going to be a father, I asked myself, how could I teach my child that truth is valuable? Not because you're going to get caught, but that it's valuable in and of itself.
Yeah,
How would I go about
inherent. How
would I go about doing that? And that question, I would say, was what brought me to God. Like, because I always thought the arguments were pretty good, but I didn't actually spend the time. I didn't feel motivated to spend the time thinking about them. But then I was very motivated to spend the time thinking about them. So that. I don't know, but not that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure. I just don't think.
Okay.
I don't think it's the same thing.
But a newborn baby will lie to you.
Oh,
like they will cry when they don't mean it.
Oh yeah, they'll lie their ass off.
They will lie when they feel like it's persuasive and elicits the result that they want.
For sure.
Sure.
So,
but
this is not this is not a matter of pragmatism. It's completely a matter of pragmatism for a newborn baby. What you do to temper that pragmatism is imbue it with some deontological moral framework, and that's kind of required. Otherwise, your kids just end up being assholes.
It wasn't naturally or God imprinted. You imprinted that. That wasn't natural at all. You imprinted that.
The value of truth.
No, but I did that. I did that from my ideological framework, and other people will do it from theirs, right? But for a lot of people, God is sort of required for them, and for me it's not so much. Well, sorry, it's really dark.
No, it's okay. I mean, I don't re-examination. I might be curious what you think about this, because like I don't. I mean, we're veering a little bit, but to me, like the question of like why value truth was like instrumental to figuring out like, oh my God, God must be real.
Right.
And because like if the answer is, and I think it's kind of. It's a good summation of the conversation on some level, because if the answer is I don't value capital T truth, then I don't think there's any argument I could give that would move you towards belief.
No,
right?
because then truth that's just as preferable as the contrary or just as valuable as the contrary to you, it's all the same.
Yeah.
Well, but I think that's analogous to like Ryan, I can understand like your framework there. I don't think that's what people kind of understand your framework to be when you tell that story and when you use somebody's phrase it. But I can understand the framework. The thing I would just ask you to accept, and the thing I'm trying to get to out here is, it feels like there's no counterexample I could ever provide that would make you kind of question these things, because you would have to attack like the much deeper philosophical like roots of either the axioms or of the existence of God in order to like change your mind and almost any of this stuff. There's no kind of conventional counterexamples I could ever provide to this type of stuff.
Yeah, because I believe humans have a nature, and because I believe humans have a nature, we should have systems of government and moral systems that honor that nature. So yes, when you tell me that you want to do something that I find to be violative of that, it would be a truly extraordinary evidentiary showing to convince me. But that's just because I believe what I'm saying, not because it's. I mean, of course.
But
it would diminish from our humanity.
You wouldn't have
the general issue with that.
You're imprinting something into children. That's not something of their nature. The fact that goats within minutes are up and sucking on the nipple. They literally are somehow go from being born to standing up and hitting the nipple within like a minute. That was in that thing's nature. Yeah. That nobody taught it that shit. It just did that shit. And what you're talking about is programming. So I don't understand how, given Nonfon's earlier hypothetical where there's a utopian society without any property rights and things like that, had you been born 100 years into that and the entire society around you had loved it and flourished, that you think that you would have suddenly gotten this idea that you have now? It comes from your experience before.
No, I disagree. I disagree with that, and that's why I think the hypo's incoherent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why did you program your child?
No.
That's a different scenario.
Programming's got some negative connotations.
Yeah, but also keep the thread separate. I don't think you need to teach a child to value life, pursuit of happiness, property. Like, I think these things all children intrinsically value. What I was asking is how to make my child or teach my child to value truth. And I agree with Grassroots that children do not naturally value truth. That's not a thing that they naturally value. And I was trying to figure out how to do that. But I've never asserted that like truth is a natural right. I don't think you have a natural right not to be lied to. I think truth is an aspiration.
It's a different. This is separate.
It's a different natural right. You're saying this is ordained by God.
But truth is not.
Truth is not ordained by God.
Truth is not a natural.
It is not part of natural rights. It is not consistent with them intrinsically.
I think one of the confusions that often happens is that people think natural law is like
the experience of all this wasn't what God had ordained, and it's our experience through that we discover what the natural laws are that God wanted. I don't understand what kind of word logic games we're playing here.
Well, when we say experience, if I experience the image of Mary on my toast, I'm not going to have a change of religion, right? But somebody who else might, who sees that toast. So it comes down to their preconceptions of how they interpret their experiences, which is even more fundamental.
Yep.
If an entire society saw Mary in a piece of toast, that entire society would live by that. And if generations of society,
why would they have to? Yeah. What if they just said that's a piece of toast? And
it's how it works.
Oh my God.
How about this, Balderson? If
people have a giant collective experience like that,
hang on, Balderson, go ahead.
Alternatively, it's how it works that they would reject that as a valid religious experience.
There are definitely people that will reject that. There's a counterculture inside every culture. That's just the way things work.
So you said they would. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, like historically, there's an interesting example here. Like before the fall of the USSR, right, there was a time period where it was really romanticized. And people were making very similar arguments about it that you're making now, Balderson, where they were saying, like, look, isn't this evidence that we don't need to have robust property rights, like people are so much happier there. Communism was really working. And if that had turned out to be true, that would be a very good rebuttal to an evidentiary rebuttal to my claim that humans have a nature and that nature is not infinitely malleable, right? Because the Soviet Union violate natural law all over the place. But it turned out that was all propaganda, and it was a hellish nightmare, and it devolved into itself very, very quickly. So part of what I'm saying is that like these drives that humans have to have self-determination, to be able to live the life they want to live, which includes improving property and making the world like what they want it to be by doing these things with their hands and building their house and providing for their children. I don't think these things are infinitely malleable. I think they are core to what humans are. So when you take them away, when you abolish them or you infringe them to a degree that is intolerable, and we can quibble about what the degree is, that system of government and that society will fail because it is contrary to human nature, and I believe humans have a nature. Now, if it had succeeded, I mean, then that would have been a very good point, I guess, in your favor, but it didn't. But that's the evidence I'd be looking for.
Which society has not failed?
I mean,
the ones that haven't failed yet.
Our little tiny short-lived one that's currently in the
thus far. Yeah. But the idea too is, and this goes back to Ryan's notion.
Historically, every society.
But to Ryan's notion about truth.
No. Give me 1 second.
Go ahead, Ryan.
The ideas that I'm espousing are the backbone upon which the modern West, the freest, richest, and best society that has ever been envisioned, was built, and it has not yet failed. So I wouldn't casually lump it in with societies that failed because of their shitty ideology. So, like, yeah, I'm not a relativist about this. I think that our society, the West, is better, and I think that these our values are the things that led to this success.
It seems to me.
I would argue in a way. In a way.
I get one at a time. Yeah, thanks.
Sorry.
Are we failing because of our good ideology then? We're failing just the same as the rest of them.
Oh, no, we're failing because we've perverted natural law.
We've deviated. Like what Ryan is talking about, it seems like there's almost a scalable amount of societal failure as much as one would deviate away from the understanding and application of natural law in the running of the society. But to the other point too is the idea about the USSR and that Ryan's notion about like why truth has value is that the Potemkin villages and everything the USSR was putting out as propaganda as to why they were succeeding. Like at a point in time where society has to rely on a fundamental lie and misrepresentation about the harm to its own citizens in order to promote its ideology, I think you kind of come to a point where that idea is not only bankrupt, but you have to try to distort and fight against reality to prove that it's still valuable, and that eventually shows through.
Sure. Did you just become my best friend?
Just briefly, like how do they distort that reality?
And I never said I don't hold the same ideals. Yeah, I'm an off-grid homesteader. You fucking ain't right. I believe in property rights and things like that.
Yeah,
okay.
You fucking ain't right.
That's what I mean.
But I'm not. But I grew up in this society. I'm programmed like that, and I recognize that. I also recognize if I grew up in a different society, that I would have thought that society was the cat's ass also.
But children who were born in the USSR behind the Iron Curtain, kids who were born behind the Iron Curtain did not just accept that this was the way to go. In fact, you have examples of Romania, for example. You had children who were born behind the Iron Curtain in the 90s, right, who did not think this was the way to go.
Yeah,
right, you look at
they had an inherent.
Introduced you to the riots down in LA or Portland.
Yeah,
okay, they had an inherent
here, which is like what's
given
social
truth
program versus what can be like what other values are there. But I think Ryan made the point earlier, like this is the internally consistent basis, axioms and basis for a moral system that can be reasoned with, right? So I'm programmed, obviously, to some degree by like where I grow up, but the only way that I can modify my my beliefs, and the only way that I can modify how I treat other people in a way that can't be adjusted. The only way I can modify my morals in a way that can't be adjusted by my society is with reason. Like what's
exactly
logically coherent.
Exactly. Where does reason play a part in your thought?
You reasoned it.
Wait,
that doesn't follow. That it's not. That God doesn't play a part just because there's reason. In fact, you could use reason as an evidence of God, of having a part of you that's independent of naturalistic influences.
Yeah, you reasoned it out. That's what I said at the beginning. Also,
reasoned what out?
Human experience is what I talked about at the
do
beginning.
you believe that humans have? Do you believe in
need
human
to put
nature?
God in there and attach some God words, and then it all is exactly the same.
But
what?
so let's test the hypothesis.
Hey, Grassroots, 1 second. Ryan's going.
Yeah.
Ryan's going.
Let's test the hypothesis. Let's forget God for the second. Do you believe, and let's presuppose that humans have a nature, like there are things about human nature that are not malleable, like if I could present you with evidence, for example, absent God, that humans it just turns out that what our founding fathers were capturing was not divinely inspired, it was evolutionary inspired. They just didn't have the word yet because they didn't know Darwin happened later. And they said, like, yeah, you know what? Humans don't want to die. Humans want to live in a society where they're not going to be like taken slave by the Barbary pirates. They want some security. They want the capacity to pursue their interests because their interests are varied. They want to raise their children. They want to provide for them. They want to use their hands to build a better life for them and their children. And they want to own those things and feel like they're not going to be arbitrarily taken away from them by some tyrannical government. Like if I just said, if those are just things that people believe, like intrinsically, and yes, you could program them away from those beliefs, right? You could maybe come up with some like propaganda system that forced people to believe something else, but that if you chisel it away, that's just core to human nature, right? And we call that natural law. Then maybe you could come to my position. Did you disagree with any of that?
In Lord of the Flies style, you took a random selection of humans from around the world and stuck them in an isolated situation with no propaganda, and that's the system that they just automatically started going by and started enacting in that way. Oh, sure, I would believe that's human nature. Then that's empirical evidence.
Yeah.
But I have yet to see that in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, the thing that I do see is primarily whatever you're programmed in the society that you live in, and programmed is the key word. And I'm not even saying that I disagree with some of the things like truth. Absolutely, I agree. Program that little kid to be honest. I don't disagree with it. We have, as a society, have decided that we function together better when we're honest with each other.
Yeah,
that's just how it works.
I think this is actually a really good synthesis, and this comment's really helpful. So maybe I can try to bridge the positions. I think I'm hoping this is helpful. What Ryan thinks is human nature is actually just a specific way of thinking that started in the Enlightenment period. And I think what Balderson and I have been fighting about the whole time, and maybe I finally got it now, is I don't think that we started programming people to think that way during the Enlightenment. I think during the Enlightenment, we discovered what human nature actually is like. And what we started doing was chiseling away programming, right? And revealing the statue underneath, which is natural law. I think another point of view would be it's always programming, right? And that kind of presupposes an infinitely malleable human nature where you can program them however you want. I think my kind of more modest hypothesis, if you don't want to go down the God route, would be that if you believe that humans have a nature, and I think you do from the things you said, but I'm not sure, but if you do, then we ought create societies that maximize people's ability to express that nature, right? We shouldn't have a society where you abolish your property rights. We shouldn't have a society where the government can just kill you for no reason. We ought to maximize your capacity to express these core human natures. Does that sound reasonable?
Oh, I
don't see how that
I agree
follows.
with most of your positions. I only disagree that they're objective.
Would you say that your programming, would your programming have you disagree that they're objective or using reason?
What's that?
Would your programming have you disagree with him, or are you using reason?
No, I'm using reason, and actually the bigger thing I'm using is logic. So logic would dictate that in order for me to find something objective, there needs to be an object that I can weigh, measure, all those things.
How do you decide which of your thoughts are programming and which of them are reason?
Well, that's just a lifelong thing that you go through, and a lot of times you end up finding them on accident. But it's absolutely where all of a sudden something that you've decided through your life experience doesn't match your reaction. Then you're like, oh well, shit, I need to do some adjustments here.
But like through observation and experience of the natural world, right? Like by those experiences and observations that your sense perception is intuitive of the natural world is how that would be challenged, right, Balderson?
Yes.
Okay.
Hey, gentlemen, I hate to be the guy, but because it's my channel, I'm going to be the guy. I was really engaged in the conversation and didn't realize that it's getting way too late for me to go, and I have work tomorrow. So here's the deal: people should gather their thoughts. Say for posterity where people can find you, unless you're like Nonfon and you have your branding on screen because you're a genius, and put together what your closing thoughts are. I'm not going to monologue at the end. I'm just going to say I deeply appreciate all of you coming in here and having a fun conversation. It's always gratifying for me with a small channel that when I have a call-in show, people show up and it turns into a big panel. That's kind of a cool feeling. I very much remember streaming to no audience whatsoever and being like, let's have call-ins, and it's just crickets. So
do you want us to stream also during these? I didn't ask ahead of time.
Me either.
You can do whatever works for you.
If we hit the stream button now, do we get the whole stream on our channel?
No.
Oh, I don't think so.
Yeah.
You have to screen cap it and re-upload it.
No, I have to come on and reiterate the entire stream verbatim.
If you use puppets.
Just like read the AI transcript.
So, unless people have strong views about the ordering, I'm just going to have you go in the order you appear on my screen. So, re-examination, closing thoughts.
Sure. You can follow me at Re-Examination Show on YouTube and X and Twitch from time to time when I'm streaming. Basically, the idea is I believe that we ground our rights in the Lord Jesus Christ, specifically the God of the Bible. And we have a personal, not only Savior, but also God that we can ground in because he has specifically revealed himself to us through his word. And we can enumerate where our value comes from, what our duties are, what our value is, what our commands are, and how to navigate the world to have a real relationship with him. And you can read the book of John if you want to do that. Don't take my word for it. But this has been an awesome panel. I enjoyed this thoroughly. It's an honest, good faith back and forth. And this is probably the best panel I've been on. Go ahead, Balderson.
I agree. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm just a farmer off. I literally live off grid. Like this is my light. It's a flashlight. I've just got a tiny generator running to keep all this stuff going. And so I just read and things like that and live life. I've not been to college and whatnot. And obviously, through some of the language, definitely some of you have, there's a few of these things I'm going to have to look up, like the omnis after this. But absolutely fantastic conversation for me. Also, I fully intend on coming back and doing it again. This was wonderful. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody. This was great. For me, it leads somewhat into where I would take the next theology leap, where personal accountability, and where that's where I find one of the weaknesses in the Christian type faith is they lose me because they don't take personal accountability with things. It's going to be very interesting. I really look forward to hearing everybody's opinion on that. Thanks for jumping in, Nonfon, and wording things much better than I do.
Hey, thanks for joining, man. I'll make sure to ping you when we're doing cause the channel's a weird mix of law and philosophy. So I'll ping you when I think your interest seems to be more on the philosophy theology side. So I'll make sure that you're in the loop.
Absolutely. And Benjamin Balderson on YouTube, and other stuff. So
thanks, give him a follow. Loodle, what's going on?
And not much. So I think ultimately where I kind of come down similar to Ryan in some respects, is basically that the the deist perspective and the idea that there are there are things that are rationally observable in the natural world that we can then use to either deduce a system of normative morality or a system of societally based morality based upon observation of the natural world. And if that gets you to God, great, but the outcomes and the way it actually functions in practical life doesn't have to rely upon a personal relationship with God. I agree with re-examination that you can get there and it will decide the way you're going to live your life. But I think that just observation in a Socratic sense almost gets you to act in the same way if you're being intellectually honest and willing to be admitting that you are ignorant about a lot of things and willing to have your perspective change and act in good faith. That's kind of where I come down on the natural law / deist side. So you can follow me on Little Miss if you want just videos of me doing crazy Lego stuff with my kids. I have a new endeavor, which is I don't know if anybody here has heard of the band Sleep Token. They're a UK band, has a lot of mythological references. Me and my brother, who's a PhD in ethnomusicology, are doing a podcast called This Podcast Will Become Your Tomb. That's our channel on YouTube, where we're taking every Sleep Token song in order and analyzing the lyrics, the music, the mythical relevancy, Youngian analysis, going through the myths or whatever. So if that touches anybody's fancy, I'll put that in the private chat right now. This podcast will become your tomb at YouTube. We're coming up pretty quick as far as subscriber counts. So if that is interesting, go ahead. If you want to watch me and my daughter play Legos and like role play Princess Belle, that's on the Little Miss channel.
Hey man, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate you. Nonfon, closing thoughts.
Yeah, happy to come on. I talk, I guess, mostly about economics, okay, but I like yelling about philosophy sometimes, I guess. I hope I have, made anti-realism, even though I don't consider myself an anti-realist, just a little bit less crazy, okay? Hopefully lowered the credence in that one. I guess it's kind of more generally, I think, with some of the natural law frameworks and to some extent other deontological frameworks, you're kind of going to either have to lead to some crazy counterexamples, or you're going to have to essentially try to avoid those counterexamples by doing similar what Ryan is doing, where we sort of discount some of our more kind of day-to-day intuitions with what we think is sort of intrinsically human nature. And I think that argument's going to essentially rely on much more controversial premises about the existence of a deity and what that deity is like and believes in such and such and such and such, right? And I think it's going to be difficult. I mean, Ryan will admit to some extent there's going to be disputes over kind of what is human nature even to begin with. I think that's a difficult thing to determine, but it's not necessarily I don't consider that an intrinsic flaw with the theory. That's more of a kind of instrumental flaw. But yeah, I talk kind of mostly about economics on my channel, stream on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Kick. You can go check out a bunch of my old debates on my YouTube channel at Nonfon. It's on screen. Appreciate coming on.
I will chill Nonfon. I like Nonfon. He's a lot of fun.
Good to have you here, Ben. Thanks for coming on. Always appreciate the good faith conversation. By the way, this panel was extraordinarily good faith, so I appreciate that. That was really wonderful. James, Gelatinous Rube, Ash, the man of many names. What's going on with you?
Find me. My goodness, you can find me at Gelatinous Rube on YouTube, where I'm usually talking about Dungeons and Dragons, though I will say there's a surprising, sometimes annoying amount of crossover between the type of conversation we're having tonight and what matters in RPGs. Yeah. I think that the only really intelligent thing I said tonight was regarding anti-realists and whether you could really trust them. The fact that they know you have an internally consistent system, or that you strive for an internally consistent system, they will attempt to begin an internal critique of your system. And I think that you should just take that as a given, or as an implicit endorsement of having an internally consistent system to begin with. It's actually totally fine when you engage with a moral anti-realist to not accept, well, it's simply my preferences. But when I'm evaluating your preferences, I'm going to try to appeal to things that you believe in, appeal to your reason, but I will never be reasoned out of my own beliefs or whatever have you. I don't think that you have to accept that. I think in a discussion of health, you can largely ignore people who say, well, you could also just kill yourself. It's not relevant. By discussing health, we accept that there's some value to it and that we want to engage with it. We are moving along an axis that we want to improve upon. We're aware that there are others. We have rejected them. That's the conversation. So, and thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to discuss this and mostly to listen along.
Yeah, no, thank you for being here. And it's a good reminder that I need to at some point do like a D&D dork stream with you, maybe with Wick. I don't know whoever else shares that particular strain of dorkiness, but I can. Eucharist?
Eucharist, yeah.
Perfect.
That was my first WIC debate, was a debate with Eucharist about, that was the first time I heard about originalism, we were debating on whether to follow the rules, and he called me an originalist. I never heard that term before.
That's perfect, yeah, because I will say candidly, the origin story of Ryan the lawyer was definitely Ryan the little boy memorizing D&D rule books. If you're the kind of person who likes to memorize rules, the law might be in your future. Grassroots, he argues for capitalism and now Georgism, yet is a wrench communist. Grassroots, final thoughts. And he's not here. So
it's like good logic on layback law.
He has been sucked up in the twister.
This is the privilege that Grassroots get. A, because
there he goes.
I feel bad about his weather situation, but B, he's a huge supporter of the space, not just my channel, but all channels. So, always appreciate having you on, Grassroots. But man, I hope you're okay. Seems like you got a big storm out there. Well, guys, thank you so much. I'm glad we resolved all the world's theological and moral questions tonight. If you missed it, chat, it was it was good that we fixed all those problems. So next time we can talk about something else since philosophy's over. But Thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you who watched and listened, and I will see you next time. Tomorrow at 1 p.m., I'm talking with Counterpoints, Counter Connor, about the future of the right. So that should be fun. We'll see where that conversation goes. A sub question might be the future of the right, semicolon, is Connor still on it? Might be another way of phrasing that conversation. So I'll be picking his brain about that. And then at 8 p.m., it is that Monday, another episode of your favorite law and politics show, Law and Order. So please do tune into that. So anyway, lots of content tomorrow, and I will see you then. Have a good night, everybody.
See ya.
Peace.
Take care, y'all. Good job, panel.
Thank you for watching, and if you want to help me continue to make content, liking, subscribing, and commenting are all greatly appreciated. You can also make sure to check out my Twitch, my Kick, and my Twitter down below, or consider becoming a member to my YouTube channel, which really helps support me as well.